Hello, and you're all very welcome to our Small Firm Association webinar on trends in the Irish hospitality sector. My name is Sven, and I'm joined here today by Gerardo Larios Riso, who is Head of Hospitality Sector Bank of Ireland. And Gerardo, what are the current trends in the industry, and what are the main opportunities and challenges of the sector?
Okay, yeah. Hello there, Sven. Thanks for hosting me here. The sector has gone for a number of years now to a level of unprecedented growth, a growth spurt that has actually given us record numbers of visitors for the last 4 years in a row. The international demand that we're experiencing is now at a level of about 11 million visitors. That's what we actually got last year in terms of overseas visitors. And that demand has been changing quite a bit. In the past, we actually had a market that was dominated by demand from the UK, and slowly over the last 10 years, that demand has actually shifted, and we're getting now a lot more continental European visitors, a lot more American visitors, and some of the emerging markets like the Chinese and the Russian market are also growing in numbers. So the dependency that we had in the past of a single market, which in the past accounted for about 55% of the visitors coming from the UK, has now reduced, and it is only 35% now. So they're actually now the second largest market behind the continental European market. And other markets like the American market have actually grown from just being a minuscule part to now being about 22% of the overall visitors to the country. So it is a very positive story what we have now, because it is a very good mix of visitors, which makes it more sustainable and also more interesting for investors. Because just like any other industry, having a diversified market source makes the industry a lot more appealing, because obviously there's sustainability issues there if you have dependency on a single market. And also very interesting is the fact that the average spend from each one of those markets is different. The UK visitors, for example, that come to Ireland generally would come here for only 1 or 2 days because they're flying from quite close. An American visitor, because they make a longer journey, they can stay here for 1 week or even longer. So the actual average spend of a single UK visitor versus one American visitor is about 3 times as much. So it's about €300 for a UK visitor on average, and it's about 900 plus for an American visitor. So the impact of the increased number of American visitors is being twice-fold. Not only are they increasing in number, but also the money they're spending is actually much higher. So it is very, very beneficial for the economy. On the other side, the UK visitors, which everybody questions, whether or not could be impacted by Brexit. For the last number of years, what has happened with them, with the exchange currency, the fluctuation of the currency that has been prevalent, they just actually been making shorter trips. So if you look at the actual number of visitors that we've had from the UK, the numbers remain pretty stable, particularly over the last 5 or 6 years, very little variances. But what has declined is the average spend. It's about 25% down over the last 10 years. So they're still coming here. It just, instead of staying 2 nights, they stay the 1 night. Instead of going out for 2 nights to a restaurant, they might only go 1 night to the restaurant. So overall, the business is actually not really feeling, particularly in Dublin, a big impact from the decline in the spend, because they're actually having other markets that are actually making up for that. In terms of the domestic demand has also gone very, very strong. That has been driven obviously by different factors, just the unemployment levels. Those have been on decline for the last number of years. They would have been at a historical low back in 2007 and 8, where it was virtual unemployment at about 5%. At the moment, we're at about 5.6%. That would have been for February 2019. And obviously that has an impact on the discretionary spend, because more people in employment means actually more money to actually be spent in pubs, restaurants and hotels. And the story there is actually that the benefit that carries is generally on a regional level. So if it is only the overseas visitors, that can be just pockets where they like to visit, particularly the main cities like Dublin, Cork or Galway, or the main visitor attractions. Whereas the domestic demand is actually better spread, and obviously that has an impact, that it has like far more reaching benefits particularly for the small business around the country. Now that is on the demand side. On the supply side, mirroring the increased demand, the last couple of years have actually seen a significant increase in the number of accommodation providers. So if we look all around the country, there's been planning permissions for development of hotels, for bed and breakfast, and for the renovation of a few of the businesses that would have actually closed down during the recession. So it is very positive for the accommodation product, because the demand is there for both the domestic and the international markets. However, for the bars, it's a slightly different story. The pub sector has actually been impacted by a number of regulations that have actually been put in place over the years. We have stricter drink driving regulations. We have labeling regulations that are coming in quite soon. And at the moment, the one that's having a big impact is the morning after checks that are happening in the roads around the country. And the problem that they carry is that people are not certain of how much drinking they have and the waiting periods, and that's having an impact on the consumption of alcohol at a regional level primarily. It's all of the regional pubs and restaurants that are feeling the pinch because people are not having the same amount of alcohol. Now, on the plus side, for those actually that have invested or that have actually focused on the food element, there's been a big surge in terms of the foodie trend, even from the domestic demand and from the overseas visitors. So we've seen a huge number of restaurant openings in Dublin and in the regions. And again, that is fantastic because we see a lot of new entrants that are trying out new concepts. And it is actually nearly inspiring. Well, it is inspiring because they're using also a lot of the local produce. So part of the impact of Brexit, which is the export of food, for example, like all of the dairy products that we have, is being partially compensated by the fact that there's been increased demand from the restaurants around the country that are actually trying to consume mostly local, because that is actually what sells best. So there's actually the positive story that is from the overseas visitors has impact on the hotels, bars, and restaurants, and also obviously on the supply that actually hits them. So it been very, very positive for even like gym producers and whatnot. We've seen obviously a surge of them over the years. Now, the demand patterns are actually changing, though, and some of the new products are being developed, just like I mentioned, with the local produce is important. It's also important for the new development of hotels and bars. It is all experience-based. So it is very important for operators to know that if they want to actually maintain and to keep on the game or top of the game, they need to invest in their premises and in the right aspect of the premises to reflect the change in demand patterns. Because we are getting different people coming back to the country. As I said, we are getting more American visitors, we're getting more European visitors, and their demands and expectations are slightly different from those of the UK. And adding to that, we're also getting obviously different generations that are coming out to visit. So if a business is actually still working on a model that would have been prevalent, let's say 15 years ago, when it was Generation Xers traveling from the UK, and now they're getting millennials coming from the US and continental Europe, they need to seriously adjust and look at their menu options and make sure that they are relevant to the market that they're serving. So it is very, very important that those businesses that haven't actually put in place or the wheels in motion to start targeting or servicing the market better, do so as soon as possible, because they'll be losing out, and they'll be slowly phasing themselves out of the market if they don't react. Now, in terms of regulation, which I briefly mentioned, in terms of the drink driving regulation, the regulation actually, the main thing that impacted the businesses for 2019 and will impact for a couple of years has actually been obviously the increase of the VAT, which is in tax as regulation as such. So that increase, which actually hit on the 1st of January this year, has been a bit of a spanner in the works for a lot of the businesses, because it is a 50% increase essentially on the VAT that would have been paid, from 9.5% to 13.5%. Now, the reality is that the government put the reduced rate, which was the 9%, as a preliminary or provisionary measure back in 2011, and it was only meant to last for a couple of years. It was kept in 2018, and it reverting, it just means that business had to be a little bit smarter in the way they manage the resources and their cost base, because the business is there at the moment. The demand is very strong. So it is just a matter of like business actually making sure that the model is one that makes the most out of the profits that they're driving, but still keep a tight cost base, because we don't know how long the demand trends that we have right now, the record-breaking demand, is going to last for. So it is important the businesses, when they're developing their new models and they're looking at the service offering, they also plan for potential, reduction in business. So they're realistic about their cost base. Because what happens, as we know, during the times of plenty, is that people tend to lose sight of the bottom line, because there's so much money coming on the top line that you forget about the bottom line. And at the end of the day, the bottom line is what actually makes a business work or not work. But so far, the business sentiment anyway is actually still very, very positive. If we look at the trend over the last few years, the business sentiment was actually probably at a peak back in 2007 and 8, and then, sorry, between 2001 and 2007. 2008 started going down, obviously with recession, and it hit like really, really lows by 2012. But then after that, since 2014, it actually went and improved substantially, and it's been a very positive story that only actually really started actually changing just over the last 2 years since Brexit vote. And we started seeing an immediate shift after the Brexit vote, but it's only uncertainty that is driving it. Performance is still actually very, very strong. But as we all know, uncertainty plays a big role in people's vision for the coming year, the year ahead. And if we roll forward to what we have in 2019, because of the VAT and because Brexit is still actually not fully settled, that uncertainty, because it's actually still growing, is having a further impact on the business sentiment. So we see that people are a little bit hesitant of getting into big projects. However, investment is still happening in hotels, bars, restaurants, and accommodation product around the country. So it is important to acknowledge the fact that there is a bit of uncertainty in terms of what the future might bring. But at the end of the day, we are at the moment in a period of peak demand. Economy is actually going really strong, so there's no point for any scaremongering or for actually, forego investment in premises that might secure the sustainability into the future. So it is important that if there's an investment need that needs to happen, to be addressed now, because if things actually go softer in the future, it is now that you can do the investment. If the market softens, you won't have the resources to do that investment. It'll be probably more difficult to source the finance if you don't have the finance already in place. So, it is a good time right now to actually look at the premises and look at what can be invested on. Fáilte Ireland on their side have actually been also quite active, obviously, in supporting and making sure businesses actually are cognizant of these challenges, but also making sure that they take advantage of the opportunities. So over the last few years, we are aware of the big programs that they launched, like the Wild Atlantic Way. They also have projects like Dublin, a Breath of Fresh Air. They have the Ireland's Ancient East. So they've been actually very active in trying to selectively target different nationalities to actually come to the country, and they obviously been trying to get a regional spread, and that's why they have these campaigns like the Wild Atlantic Way or the Ancient East. They all target different parts, and it is because they want a regional spread. They don't want visitors just to come to the country. They want to make sure that all of the areas in the country benefit from those visitor numbers. Now, in the past, it wasn't. The benefit was still mainly concentrated in Dublin, Cork, and Galway. But little by little, with a few projects they've been doing in terms of capital investment for some of the regional attractions, they've been managing to get penetration from customers, from overseas visitors, really to other regions. So that's actually been a very, very positive story. If we look, for example, at the market in Killarney, which is traditionally been quite strong anyway with overseas visitors, the impact from all of the strategies that Fáilte Ireland has put in place has allowed their trading period to be extended. In the past, hotels would have closed down in and about October, November, and they would really only open in March. Now they're actually closing about 2-3 weeks later, and they're opening about a month earlier. So that's giving an extra 2 months of work to a number of people in the region, and it is all purely based on the fact that there is demand now that is being extended for a couple of more months to do the actions of targeted advertising for particular times of the year when we know the demand is actually low. So that's actually been very, very positive. Now, there's also obviously a couple of headwinds, like in any industry. One of the big headwinds that we have for the sector is the sourcing of qualified staff. And again, it's not a hospitality quite, it's actually in manufacturing, it's in the retail sector, it's everywhere. Having an issue that we would have in terms of the qualified staff for kitchens is been there for, I say, the last 3 years, and it's been highlighted by the Resident Association of Ireland, by the Irish Hotels Federation, the Vineyards Federation. There's been a number of programs that they've actually tried to put forward to, but it still hasn't addressed that slight shortfall in terms of qualified staff. And because unemployment levels actually, continue to drop, that is actually putting further pressure then on the sourcing of good staff for those premises. So that is actually the main headwind that I see, much stronger even than Brexit, is the fact that businesses are actually having to pay a little bit more for staff. And the hospitality sector, the tourism sector in general, is one that has always worked on low profit margins, because it is a service industry. So we are quite dependent on having good staff that are providing the service, and with the cost of that staff, we could be in sometimes 40 or 50% of the business going up. That is making some businesses actually, having to really question whether or not they can sustain themselves into the future. So it is very important for business to focus on getting good staff and trying to retain them, because retention is a key focus for most of the bigger players. Now, there's a number of trends that are emerging in the sector. It isn't only the unemployment levels, and it's important that businesses actually remain cognizant of those trends, because they tend to bring opportunities and they also represent challenges into the future. The first one is actually the digital distribution. That has been on the cards for a number of things. I know that we will be talking about cloud technology and whatever not, but the digital distribution allows small businesses, no matter how small they are, to actually enter into the market quite quickly, because they can be identified by customers and they can target specific customer segments incredibly easy compared to what we've been in the past. So they can challenge the existing players or the settled players and straight away make an impact. Because in the past, it was more the word of mouth, and it was trying to make a statement when you were opening a business. Took a couple of years for them to get off the ground. Nowadays, that has actually happened almost immediately if you have a good social media marketing campaign, or if you pay for internet advertising, be it on Facebook or in Instagram or whatnot. So that is very positive for all of the new entrants. The fact that they can now challenge established businesses with a product, as long as they actually have the right target market. So if you have a market that you're targeting, it is and you are clear in terms of the product that you have, you can get into it with relative ease. There's also, as I mentioned before, there's a big focus on tourism, food tourism potential. There's been investment campaigns done by Fáilte Ireland, by the Business Federation of Ireland. There's a couple of new training programs that have been in place, and that focus actually heightened now for 2019, where Fáilte Ireland have a full month of activities planned towards the end of the year. So it's initially was going to be called the month of food. It's now actually called the quarter of food or something, and it's going to be just highlighted at an international level what Ireland has to offer in terms of food and beverage. And it'll be a big campaign that will be launched towards the end of the year. So that's very positive, because it's actually showing the world what we can actually produce in food and beverage, and making people actually question whether or not they should travel to some destinations in terms of, instead of just coming to Dublin, because they know that they'll get more diversity and they'll get a much more comprehensive experience if they travel to some of those regions. So that's very good. Some of the trends that are emerging, obviously there's healthier trends. Most restaurants nowadays would actually have either vegetarian or vegan options, or gluten-free options, or allergens. All of those things are very important because they're demanded by the market. And if you don't have those things, you're alienating part of the customer base that could potentially hit those premises. So it is very important that businesses react to that change in demand. Also important is the fact that a lot of the customers now in some locations don't have time to sit down for longer meals. So the grab and go concepts, that have been there for years, have actually increased even further. And that's what we have, in any major city now. We have all of these places where you can go and buy a salad in a box and whatnot. That has been growing substantially, and the market share that they're getting, is enormous. So it is important that if you have a capability of actually servicing your customers and still try to penetrate that market as well, have a go. It isn't prohibitively expensive to try to do grab and go concept, because it is just about packaging the product that you already have and trying to make sure that you have it at the correct temperature, and that the expiry dates and whatever not are clearly marked down for the people to take it. And but that's really it in relation to the trends. The other things will be at a more macro level or countrywide level, would probably just be in terms of the alcohol that I mentioned earlier on. Like we have the gin that has been going. So gin sales have actually grown exponentially for the last number of years. The craft beers would have actually had the same kind of exponential growth, but they started way before and they kind of like peak now. So we should be seeing a kind of like a peaking of the gin market as well in a couple of years' time. And again, that's impacting a lot of the menu designs for venues around the country. So that's kind of like my view of the market in a snapshot.
Thank you, Gerard. A really interesting and comprehensive tour de force of the Irish hospitality market. If you were to give a few words of wisdom to a smaller business with a turnover of, let's say, 500,000 euros per annum with a relatively small number of staff, what would your advice be for them to face the challenges and the opportunities that you've just mentioned?
Okay, well, the first of all is actually just to identify whether or not your model is actually already working at an optimal level. There's ways of addressing, you look at all of the areas within your business, even if it's a small business, there'll be parts of it that just might not be as profitable, whether it's actually a section of the menu that is actually not selling, or whether you actually have periods of heightened demand, of lulls, and try to see how can you address your current model to just improve on it. So that's the first thing, just review whether or not there's efficiencies that can be sought. And then second of all is if the overall model or the overall sales have not picked up over the last couple of years, which they should have had, because again, the demand is actually much higher, is perhaps because the product has actually failed to meet market expectations. So you could potentially then look at repositioning either the entire business or part of the business to try to make sure that it is more targeted. Nowadays, everything is about being personalized businesses. Customers like to be identified, and customers know that their needs and wants have actually that are known by the service providers. So it is very important that you react to what the customers want, and either asking for something, or if you see that somebody is actually doing something really innovative that you can offer to your customers, you can do it. You can do it as well. So it is basically that. Just know your customers, and if you can improve something, do your research. Don't just jump into the pool and think that that just by producing something that you think is better, it will be bought. It is actually reacting to customers' wants and needs.
What's the best way of our listeners to reach out to you, John? How can they get in touch?
Well, I produce a number of publications that are available on LinkedIn. So if they want to follow on LinkedIn, there's plenty of information that I will share on a regular basis. And if not, I'm perfectly happy to just get emails from anybody. So my email address is gerardo.lariosriso@boi.com. And I'm sure they can find a link or something from this tutorial anyway.
This concludes our webinar today. Thank you very much, Gerardo, for your very insightful presentation. And as Gerardo said, any questions, reach out to either him using LinkedIn or his email address, or simply email info@sfa.ie. Thank you very much.